Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. It's the morning after Scotland versus the Springboks, and a bit of time to reflect on exactly where the Springboks are. And I think personally, yesterday was almost the definition of the perfect game for Rassie Erasmus. And that doesn't mean it was necessarily the perfect performance, but it was exactly what we would have wanted as a Springbok fan. Going into the game with all the wholesale changes, and we'll kind of actually look at exactly which players have been involved in both the England game and then were involved in the Scotland game. Lots of changes, lots of new combinations. But in terms of exactly what we would have wanted, it was everything we needed because we saw a rotated side take on a Scottish side, which is playing some of the best rugby they've ever played. I genuinely think this is one of the best Scottish sides that we've seen. And, they've struggled with consistency, but when they turn it on, I think they are one of the top sides in the world. And yesterday, a Springbok side that was quite inexperienced were really made to work hard for a test match result, which is exactly what you want. And I'm just glad that, as fans, most of us seem to have looked at it and said, you know what, that was a top-class Scottish performance, and we still got the victory. Yes, there were a few red flag moments. There were learnings, but we always want to see learnings, because that's what keeps the hunger. That's what keeps us grounded. If you are, going and putting out, 40 points to nil, for example, which we basically did a year ago against Italy, it's a fantastic result. Do we learn as much? Probably not. And yesterday, Rassie Erasmus got so much information on players that play, and he said so. He basically said, some players came through really well and clearly looked like they are ready. Other players, maybe not so much. And this is the entire point of having what is basically a 48-man squad and rotating and being willing to make the big calls and seeing how everybody kind of can come in and come out because you get the information. And that squad will start to be sort of whittled down, but we'll start to get a bit of an idea of exactly what that 33-man squad might look like in a year's time, hopefully towards the end of the year. When we really start to take a bit of a smaller squad over to Europe. And that'll kind of be a bit of a reflection of what to expect next year. And I think what's the exciting part as well is when we look at some of the players involved across the both tests, is the players that aren't involved and are injured at the moment that haven't featured. Somebody like an Eben Etzebeth, Sia Khaleesi, Franco Mostert. Now word that Fami Gomezulu could be involved for Argentina. More van den Berg apparently tracking well to be called back into the mix. So lots of players who are currently injured, who haven't featured, and yet we've still managed to use a large part of the group. And that's why I think yesterday was the perfect game because it was tough. It was, the momentum swung. We had to dig deep. There were difficult moments. We went down to 14 men. But these players rallied, and players really did stand up when they needed to, which I think really elevates their profile. And some players maybe didn't come through the game, with the greatest, performance. And that in itself is very useful as well. So if we look at sort of, this is kind of the squad that we've got, and we can kind of sort of see the players who have been involved so far and have not. So obviously, injuries have meant that Lua Jayagi, Eben Etzebeth, Ryan Orton, Franco Mostert have not been involved as of yet because of injuries. But if we look at our prop stocks, for example, Carly Sardi, the only prop within the squad who has not featured yet within the first two games. And I think we'll probably potentially see him against Wales and hopefully get him a bit of a debut. But already we're seeing, for example, some trends. The like of Zach Porthen being deployed 2 games in a row off the bench. The only prop that was used across both tests. And I think he came through with flying colours. If we look at our hookers, for example, we started at Malcolm Marks in the first test. We started Johan Krobler in the second test. Might we see Andre Hugo Venter in this test? Lock was always a bit of an issue for us, but given the amount of injuries, we've seen Ruan Lockyer get through 2 games. We've seen Peter Steph the Toy start there at 1. We've seen Kobus Visa being trialled there. We haven't seen Ruben van Heerden yet, but that's basically it. So already across the 3 sort of positions, only 3 players who haven't featured as of yet. If you look at the loose forwards, 2 starts for Paul de Villiers, 2 bench appearances for Ben Jason Dixon. Everybody else has gotten minutes. Vincent Tuka, unfortunately, only getting about 4 because he came on and then had an HI and had to go off. But we've seen Evan Lewis start a game. We've seen Cameron Hanekom start a game. Paul de Villiers now looks kind of like a bit of a mainstay in the squad, how much he's elevated his profile. We look at our utility forwards, for example, Jan-Hendrik Vessels being deployed at loosehead and at hooker in the last couple of games, and Marco van Staden being used as well. Scrum offs as well. The only person that hasn't featured so far is Herschel Yankees, but we've been able to start a Imbro Sapir. We've started a Grant Williams, and we've managed to get Kubas Reinach some minutes, where probably a bit earlier than we thought he might. Initially Rassie basically said that he wasn't sure that he'd be available come England, but we have managed to get him through, and we have gone through games. So far, we've managed to give lots of minutes to Monty Liebach as well as Andre Pollard. We've used all our centres so far. We've basically used all our outside backs, except for Jaco Williams, who's under 20, as well as Alex Vusi Moya, for example. So we might not have seen the under 20s, but I think the point of them being in the squad is not necessarily to give them caps. Vusi Moya, Jaco Williams, Riley Norton, probably not really in an ideal world in the selection frame for the World Cup, because we want to see players back like Sasha, for example, in the fly half. We want to see, Aches Neyman, Lut Jager, all these sort of players being available. So does Riley Norton go to the World Cup? Likely not. Does Jaco Williams go to the World Cup? Likely not. But they're in the mix. And I think this is why I said I think it was the perfect game for Rassie yesterday, because we saw a lot of the old guard, inverted commas, against England. And I'm talking your Oxen Chair, your Thomas de Toys, your Kubus Reinach, Damien Delendi, Kurt Jarens, Cheslin Colby, and then we rotated and we gave some players a chance against Scotland, who, as Rassie said yesterday, beat England. Put 50 points on France. This is a side that is a top side, and we'll now be able to give players the opportunity against them. I thought yesterday somebody like a Bone Fenter was very solid at scrummage time, but I thought he was so good around the park. I haven't seen that kind of performance from him. Soft hands, really high work rate, getting through a very big shift. As a Lions fan, I watched it and thought, phenomenal. We're getting a great player. But this is where you start to see the absolute class of Rassie Erasmus. Look at how many players we have been able to get involved. And we still have another test. And this is now the test where we very much probably can rotate. The good news, I think, is that Wales are tracking well. They lost last night against Argentina, but there's definitely a Welsh side there that aren't going to come and lie down, which means hopefully, again, we're not going to get the challenge that New Zealand's going to throw at us, France is going to throw at us, or an Ireland next weekend. But hopefully we're not going to get a bit of a walkover side, which Wales were at the end of last year. And let's be honest, there wasn't massive amounts of value in that game. But every single time we get players out, we get information. And that is kind of where we're at the moment. First of all, you've got 2 bonus point wins. So we'll sit at the top, alongside New Zealand of the Southern Hemisphere kind of log. And, they've got Ireland next week. We've got Wales. So if Ireland do a job, we'll stay at the top. And then we've got a difficult end-of-year tour. But we can afford to take the strongest team possible and go and try and win 3 or 4 games and get a potential trophy if we can get over the line against Wales. But what we've done well is we've managed to just play so many different players, use so much of the squad. And this is kind of the point. And I think we've now finally aligned to the fact that we might see close results. And that's what Rassie said. He said there was half the team had fewer than 10 caps yesterday. So he said cohesion was always going to be a struggle, but they got the result. They did manage to rally. Yes, there were things, and I think that kind of always explains the defensive side of things. I think your defense is always something that needs the most time. We saw when Jacques Nienaber came in, for example, and how long it took for us to adjust to his rush defense system. And that is why I think, it's easy to go and throw the blame at Jerry Flannery, but these are players who are coming in, coming out all the time, haven't played a lot of rugby together, haven't played a lot of rugby in the system. And I think that's the main thing, is that what we've done now, is we brought players in, and now moving forward, we'll see. I think we'll see more consistency in selection. Yes, we'll see a bit of a rotated side against Wales, and I think the side we'll see against Argentina will be a side of players who aren't necessarily going to be involved in the first week or two of the greatest rivalry tour. I'm really hoping we'll see players going back to their province. I want to see Zachary Porthan playing for Stormers against the All Blacks alongside alongside Andre Hugo Fenter, Paul de Villiers, Ben Jason Dixon, the likes of those. We want to see really strong franchise sides being put together. So I think yesterday, the perfect game. A game where we got everything we needed out of it, including the result, including the performances, and lots of information. What were your takeaways? We'll break the game down a little bit more the next day or two, but we can't spend too much time resting on it because we've already got to look ahead with Rassie set to announce his team in the next day or two. So let me know what your thoughts are of yesterday's performance down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve, and I'll chat to you soon.